Hi, this is the first of my innovation videos, and this particular one is about capturing data about real humans that are complex individuals, multi-layered, and in all our artificial intelligence databases kind of need to be reflected for who they truly are in order to be successful in understanding what those people would like from us. So I was thinking about breaking marketing open. I'd like to think about how we think about real people. We're not one label, we're multiple labels. Does one purchase ever really indicate our future purchases and our future buying habits? I was thinking quite a lot recently about brand loyalty. I've been watching loads of comedians and thinking about how and why I watch their videos and what attracts me in at the very beginning within that millisecond of the decision to watch it. As I'm sure most people have experienced within most websites, we get these bizarre recommendations where people recommend the thing we purchased yesterday to purchase tomorrow. And that seems completely illogical. Obviously, we have that thing already. So our buying habits are not really indicated by our historical behavior. What we need to look at is the kind of next steps of what that purchase might be. Also been thinking about how we incorporate trends. My daughter watches loads of videos on TikTok, and there are loads of trends that just pop up and recur within that social media platform, which are completely unpredictable and often based on songs that were issued in the 90s, for example. And so overall, what we're really looking at here is how we sell to the complete person and not just a part of that person, not just using one indicator of their future behavior, but multiple indicators. So when we look at traditional demographics, often these are the categories that we look at. So there's various quantitative measures which are really absolute, you know, what their age is, what their gender is, their ethnicity and class. I mean, that could be based on income or background. But there's also other things that are fairly quantifiable, like sexuality, health, occupation, and religion. But unfortunately, those things aren't generally captured easily in databases, partly because people don't always want to disclose, but partly because, you know, it just may never occur to the organization to capture that data. So I've also been thinking about the more subjective demographics that each individual really has. Personality is one where there are many models like Myers-Briggs, which measure, you know, who you are and what your likely traits are. And there's 16 different types. So if we layered in those kind of Myers-Briggs personality assessments, we'd have a much more deep understanding of who that person is. And we could also look at their experience in their life. So something from your LinkedIn profile may factor into, you know, how your future buying behavior might transgress, I guess, morph in the future. And that may also be based around your education and background in terms of your family dynamics. But there's also other qualitative measures which will impact what you do with your life and who you're influenced by. And one of these is your network. So obviously within social media, we have many networks. We have our Facebook networks with our friends, our LinkedIn networks with our professional colleagues. But increasingly, we've got other networks like through Instagram, Snapchat, if you use that particular platform, maybe TikTok. And all of those networks will influence us in terms of what brands we see, what trends we see, how often our friends recommend certain products to us or certain companies. And these things are more subjective, they're less measurable, but I think you can still see them within the data at some level. There may also be a factor in buying decisions of what your mood is. So they always say that you should never go shopping on an empty stomach because you're more likely to buy more food that way. But mood can also be whether you're happy, whether you're feeling confident about your future income. And then that may indicate how you spend. There's also a thing around your perceptions. On the next couple of slides, I start thinking about prejudices, but perceptions are more about kind of a snapshot view of a particular company, whether that's giving you a positive message, a negative message. And ultimately that perception forms an opinion, which is a more long-term sort of understanding of who that organization is and whether you would ever want to interact with them on a regular basis. So when we're thinking about reflecting real people, we are really looking at individuals on a bus, you know, a random selection of people. Spoke to a friend of mine a couple of years ago, and he said we can no longer assume that the person buying a car is a man in his 40s, you know, that's got a certain level of income. Actually, car buying decisions are made by the woman often. But actually, when you walk into a car sales room, often it's the man that the salesperson focuses on, and that's still the case. So, so I'm thinking about, you know, if I'm looking to buy a car, which I did a few years ago, I don't want them to judge me based on the way I look, the way I dress, my age. I actually want them to ask me questions about who I am and really sell consultatively. And so a lot of this data is about thinking about how we can market consultatively to the people in front of us, thinking about, you know, every factor of their behavior. And that really comes from asking questions, but also looking at the cycles of buying behavior. So I was thinking about, you know, Amazon know the most data on us of any company in general. If I suddenly start buying counseling books, how to improve your relationship, then move on to how to handle your divorce in an efficient way or the best possible way for your children, then that really indicates that I'm in a life stage. I'm experiencing a life event that kind of allows that company to predict what I might want next. And so rather than making recommendations based on my historical buying, I have bought a book on divorce, I'll need another book on divorce. It will say, well, you've got a book on divorce, but how about a book on recovery from divorce? And so that's what I'd really like to be able to help companies integrate into their databases, because this is all about understanding and information. And I realized at the moment it would be very, very difficult to capture some of these environmental factors within any kind of AI database. But as our level of technology, level of interaction with people becomes more and more online, some of these things will become very apparent very quickly. So I think the easiest indicator on this particular list is timing. So for me, I often do online shopping around 6 p.m. It's usually either just before I've cooked dinner or just after I've put the dinner on. And so I'll be browsing on Amazon, thinking about the things that I wanted, looking at my wish list, for example. So often the best time to catch me is that time. And I'm sure Amazon know this very well. So they probably send me some kind of recommendation through their engine. But there may also be other environmental factors. So the fact that I look at buying at that time is partly due to my family situation because I've got a child. I don't think it's due to society expectations, to be honest, but there may be factors where, you know, you habitually purchase online because, you know, at the moment we've got COVID, we're locked in, we can't really go to the shops. But there may also be, you know, the reluctance to go shopping if you don't enjoy it, or, you know, it's a stressful experience for you. So then you may shop online instead of going into retailers. And that also kind of sits in what culture we've been raised in. So I'm sure in the 70s and 80s, everybody would have assumed that they'd be going into the high street to buy the goods that they wanted, you know, ad infinitum. But now we're in a completely different world and we don't have the constraints that that generation had. So we can literally shop 24 hours a day, and I'm sure many people do. And the final factor in this area is around our prejudices. So there may well be things that are reflected in our buying patterns about how we may view the world, you know, whether you're passionate about climate change, whether you have any religious affiliation. So it's not necessarily prejudices in a way, but you may perceive other people in a different way, and you may buy books to either overcome that prejudice or perhaps to reinforce it. So finally, when we've looked at all the demographics of, you know, who the person is, then we can also look at the personas. So the personas really are their identity, their roles in life. And so in the academic publishing world, then often an individual will be a researcher and a teacher, but also still be learning for continual professional development. They may also be an author, a peer reviewer, and they may also be a parent of, someone in their late teens who's just started studying the same subject. And so they may be reading actually to teach their child or to assist their child in that way. So the way I think about demographics and personas is that really the traditional demographic is very much a starting point for understanding human behavior. Then there's the more subjective around the personality, their circumstances, their education, their experience. Then there's the environmental, where they live, what they do for work, and who they come across within that environment, but perhaps also how their opinions are slightly skewed by the way they've been raised, or where they live, or the school they went to. And then on top of that are the roles that they hold within society. So it's not about the individual necessarily, it's about the individual, their personality, their traits, their experience, but also what they're doing in their life. And literally those roles could switch throughout the day. So at 8 o'clock in the morning, you may be doing your continuing professional development. At 12 o'clock, you may be teaching someone. At 4 o'clock, you may be writing a research article. And so your persona actually switches throughout the day and throughout the week, potentially. And that applies to everyone. So when I was thinking about AI databases over the next few years, the most important thing really is the data and underlying data and how we capture that, and whether we capture that data intelligently and incorporate it into our databases intelligently, or whether we're just literally just taking the superficial really in terms of data set. So as we look at the data, we'll see that there's a kind of level of tiers of data that we achieve. The simple things like, have they bought a book on X? That's very much the lowest layer of data, in my opinion. But the kind of personality that we're seeing in terms of their buying patterns, that's very different. And then on top of that, we look at layering those demographics and actually modeling, a researcher buying a book on X at 11 o'clock in the morning is likely to be having a coffee, all those kind of things. So it's a kind of multi-layered approach that I'm looking at. We need the layers of data, we need to capture that data to start with, but actually to gain a true understanding of that person, that kind of category of human behavior, if you like, we need to layer those demographics and order them in terms of selection and priority, and also factor in the environment they're in and the sociological influences that they may be under in terms of, what are the trends at the moment? What are the society expectations on a woman with a young child who's looking to be a senior leader? So I think the modeling really reflects not only who that person is in terms of labels, but kind of follows their daily, weekly journey in terms of, what they do in a practical way, but also how they think and how their opinions may change over the course of time. And then the next layer in terms of AI is to address any skewed data. So there was something I watched recently where they said that in B-Sky-B, their data predicted that hardly any women would become senior leaders. And that was solely because in the past, no women had become senior leaders. So the developers and the machine learning, if you like, really didn't cater to that historical bias or that historical pattern. So I think we need to adjust the historical bias, but also to add new trends. If we're seeing an increasing number of women who have the ambition to become a senior leader, then that trend should kind of be factored into the predictive nature of AI. And then ultimately, when we've incorporated all those things, we can actually market intelligently to people. We can make intelligent recommendations about the next step they're likely to make in their career, the next step, the next book, the next video they might need to help them through the life event that they're experiencing. We can then increase the appeal of, actually receiving marketing at all. I think most people only have the marketing they're really interested in from the companies that that they actually are attached to in some ways. The reason I unsubscribed from many of my marketing emails was because I realized I wasn't even looking at the subject line. I was only looking at the company and assuming as a result it's from that company that I'm not interested. So the deletion rate for me was really high, and the sales conversion in the number of marketing emails I was getting was really low. The only emails that I've actually kept are things with content in them that I actually appreciate reading on a daily basis, whether that's a quote from Simon Sinek or whether it's something more extensive around marketing behavior from Seth Godin, or there's another writer that I look at very carefully who talks about how to create beautiful things. And so all of that content is really attractive to me. It actually inspires me on a daily basis. And everything else I've just deleted. So it seems like kind of a waste of time sending those marketing emails out. I know that for publishing, for example, if you get a table of contents alert, that's really useful. And that is a very systematic email. But, you know, from a clothing company, to just get random offers through all the time when I don't really need them, don't really want them, haven't really purchased from them that year. Actually, those marketing people really could look at my buying behavior in more detail and send those emails, you know, say at the beginning of September when I'm about to buy a winter coat or something like that. So the next steps for me in developing this idea is really to think about how to obtain the multi-layers of data in a practical sense in order to incorporate them into company databases. Once they're incorporated into the database, then obviously the modeling on top of that data is really important. You know, how on earth do you fit all that complex data together? And I think that's going to take our organizations, you know, 5-10 years to come up with as the technology becomes more sophisticated. I'd really like to look at an overall roadmap of incorporating this kind of sophistication of technique into how we market to, you know, real humans, and then look at the practical application and what that would actually mean for somebody marketing out to the world in a kind of real way, to have, you know, that kind of such a high level of relevance to the individual that it's almost assumed that they'll click and buy. Because you've reduced down the tailoring of those communications to such a level where you're really catching that person at exactly the moment they're about to make a buying decision. So I'm going to talk about that in future talks. Honestly, it's pretty complex, so it's going to take me a while to put together, and I'm very much at the start of this journey of ideas around the kind of data and how we look at human beings in the future. But I hope it's going to be useful for people. So thank you very much. I'm Ruth Wells from Inventing Change. I've really enjoyed talking to you.